Our next speaker, Judy Johnson, is an expert in facilitation, the art of helping people deal with a process or reach a solution. She is also a longtime practitioner of meditation of the Brahma Kumaris. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Judy Johnson.
My mom died when I was 5, and my world changed completely. I remember being really confused as a little girl. I didn't know what happened to her. I didn't know where she went. I didn't know why she was with me, wasn't with me anymore, and worst of all, I think I got really angry because none of the adults around me could explain anything to me. In fact, every time I asked, they got really uncomfortable and said things that I didn't really understand. Oh, she went here, or she went there, or not to worry. So I didn't know where she went. And I also understood very quickly that it wasn't something that I could talk with many people about. That it seemed to make adults uncomfortable if I asked about death. And yet, I needed to understand, and I couldn't understand. So I think I asked more and more, until finally one day, I probably understood this wasn't a good subject for conversation, death. And back then, I don't think death was very comfortable, maybe not today either, but I don't think anybody talked about death back then, especially not with children. So there was one person in my life who was okay with it, my granny. She was 88 years old. And I remember asking her directly, "Granny, what do you think is going to happen to you when you die?" And I remember her looking at me like, I don't know, I guess she saw me as an equal and not a little kid or not mad or something. And she said, "I don't know, but I'm not afraid." Oh, okay. So this began, I think, for me, a long journey of trying to understand what was death all about. And not in a morbid way, like I didn't want to understand. Well, I don't know, I wasn't part of it. It wasn't the negative aspects. I sort of thought there was something important about death, but I didn't know what, and I couldn't really find anyone who could tell me. When I was an adult, so I think most of my life I've been kind of curious about death, but more the process, what happens to us when we die. And I remember about 10 years ago, a very dear friend of mine said to me out of the blue, he said, "You know, when I die, and if I'm in a hospital bed or somewhere, you know, for a long period," he said, "I think I'd like you by my side." I thought, what a weird thing to say, especially out of the blue. And I said, "Why? Why would you say that?" And he said, "Because I don't think you would pity me, and I think you would give me strength. And this is the part that really interested me. He said, I think you would help me move forward rather than holding me back." And when he said that, I realized that that was true. And there was a little secret there about myself that I hadn't seen before, that I know that I wouldn't have held him back. I know I wouldn't have said, "Oh, you have to stay and be sad," and you know, I wouldn't have been attached like that. But I didn't know where I'd be helping him forward to. I just knew I wouldn't be holding him back. So again, this theme of death, and I realized I wasn't really afraid of death, but I also didn't know much about it. And then, about 20 years ago, I came to meditate with the Brahma Kumaris. And in Canada, in the place where I live, in Halifax, there was no meditation center. So I was it. And I had a kind of wake-up experience in a business conference, of all surprising places. And I just had this awakening where I felt God's presence, and I felt that I was, I guess I knew later I was the soul. At the time I just felt blissful and happy and peaceful inside, and I didn't know why. But then I discovered, oh, this is something to do with meditation, and I found the Brahma Kumaris. And one of the practices of the Brahma Kumaris Meditation Center is what we call dying alive. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my goodness, this theme, dying again. What is this about? And then I heard an expert on palliative care speak about the dying process. And she said that dying is actually a transition. And I really liked how non-final that felt. Transition, okay, I can handle that. I didn't know to what or where. And she said, actually, when a person goes through a dying process, they experience 5 phases. And the first phase is, well, and each of the 5 phases actually was connected to the elements. So the first phase of leaving a body, when a soul dies, is that the person withdraws all of their attention from the physical world. So whether this is a long process or a slow process, it's the same. The first thing is they kind of lose interest in worldly matters. So all that money that's stockpiled in the bank actually isn't very useful when you're dying, right? All of the possessions you've accumulated, the house, the accomplishments, the medals, the trophies, the acumen, the CV, all of this isn't quite so important. And so a natural disinterest develops in those things. But then the second disinterest is in the body itself. And, not feeding it, not entertaining it, just sort of a stillness settles in to the physical form. But the soul then actually withdraws energy from the toes up to the last to go is the eyes. So actually withdrawing physical energy or energy from the body. And then, after that, the next phase is emotional. And so after the earth of the body is let go, the next is the water of emotions. And emotions, for all of us who experience them, are a little bit like typhoons. So they come like water, or sometimes just like pitter-pattering rain. But they tend to be waves. Emotions are like waves. And so the second thing that happens to a soul leaving their body is that they contend with all of the emotions that they have in them, which is kind of like coming to peace or making peace with everything you've created emotionally in your life, your relationships, your people. And actually, you kind of have to make peace with what you've done. You have to make peace with yourself. You have to find a place inside yourself where you can be okay with what you've done. So lessons learned, forgiveness, releasing yourself and others, be free. So that's the second phase, is the water element. Interesting. The third phase is fire. And she talked about the fire being our thoughts that burn in our minds. And so the fire, it could be a fire of anger, which is like emotion, but a fire that keeps sparking my thought energy. And a fire that keeps me, I guess the passions of thinking, but also thinking that leaves indelible impressions in my mind that I can't be free from. These actually have to cool. So she talks about the fire of thought's cool. So she said this is the fire element. Again, this palliative care specialist who'd watched many people die and said there were these typical phases. But then the last phase she described as air. And she said what happens at the end is that the soul is ready to go. The soul's become light and very air-like, almost like energy. You can just feel it in the room. But in order to leave, they actually have to let go of the habit of breathing. And she said in the final moments, when a soul is actually pretty much ready to leave, the body will gasp, like that. And it's like the soul has such a habit of keeping air in the body that it kind of can't leave it. It has to keep the habit going of air. And so air is the last, and then the final is ether, as I would say in Canada, ether, where you're ready just to transition into the light. And this is where most souls have that near-death experience, out-of-body experience, where they're above their body looking down, and they become so clear, I am not that body. That I am this being of light, I am this being, and I am above it all and flying, floating, air-like, and ready to go down the tunnel of light to God. The shared experiences, there are helpers, there's support, there's a lot of love, it's a friendly time, not to worry, and then the soul leaves. So, for those that aren't interested in death, that might not be such an interesting story, but I was fascinated by this description from a palliative care expert, and especially in relation to the 5 elements. And I didn't really know why until I began to meditate. So, this dying alive practice, we sit, sometimes cross-legged, sometimes kneeling, whatever's really comfortable for you. But that's when I discovered, oh, this death thing is pretty relevant to me as a meditator. Because dying alive is very much like the death process. I sit, I'm in a body. I have all kinds of worldly concerns. I have a shopping list. I have a to-do list. I have concerns about my business and my family. There are things I have not done. And yet, I want to sit and be peaceful in my meditation. My first step is just to say, okay, I'm going to let go of that for the 10 minutes I'm meditating. And I pull my attention away from the worldly things, including my body. I might deep breathe, I might relax, but then so I can just let my body be and not be pulled by it, drawn to it. It's just there. The next step is I pull myself in further still until I experience the emotions that are in my mind and heart. And they often make my heart go. But often they're ripples like waters or typhoons in my mind. And I make a decision to pull my attention behind the feelings and the emotions. So like when a storm comes, a storm of feelings, it passes. And I'm still here. So clearly, I wasn't the emotions. They came and they go. And I watch. So my second step is I pull behind the emotions. My third, I notice what's burning in my mind. And I look at those thoughts and I think, I don't really need all of you right now, but I can ride one positive, pure thought into silence. So I have a thought of peace, or I have a thought of love, or I have a thought of happiness. And this thought cools my mind. And suddenly then, I'm at peace. I'm in a body. I'm not emotional, but I'm feeling peaceful. And in that moment, I have actually died alive. Until the last beautiful step, which is when I turn my attention up to the light of God. My eternal friend has always been there, will always be there, and will be the final one I meet. And I do all of this while sitting on a comfortable cushion, in a comfortable room, fully alive. And yet, because I have walked the process towards death, I am free from fear. I have made peace with myself, with my emotions, with my thoughts, and I have settled into a gentle inner experience of my own good company. And, most important, the company of God. And when I practice this dying alive, I have so much energy to bring to life. In fact, this practice of meditation allows me to move my body gracefully, easily, smoothly, because I'm no longer trapped in it. I know that I'm the one who makes it move. So my body moves freely. My voice can be more gentle. My voice can be a bit more harmonious, kind of like the music of the arts. And my thoughts can be like the colors of an artist's palette. And I can paint my life with beauty, the beauty of my own thoughts. Ultimately, dying alive allows me to live freely, allows me to live peacefully, allows me to live as art. And then I sit in God's spotlight.
Ladies and gentlemen, Roseanne Cruz, Gong Master, Kundalini Yoga Teacher, and Theta Healer. We hope you bring home peace as you leave the theater. Thank you and good night.